Welcome to Reddit Aliens. People of Reddit who have interacted with, met, or had a close call with a serial killer, what happened? What were they like? What was your reaction to seeing them on the news? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. When I was 7, a man knocked on our door at about 8:30 at night. My mom and I were in the living room watching TV. My mom answered the door, and he said something about selling newspapers. She said she wasn't interested, and as she tried to close the door, he tried to force his way inside. She always had the chain latch on, and she kicked the door closed on his arm as he tried to grab for her. He ran away, and she called the police. About a year later, Cleophas Prince Jr. was arrested for killing 6 women, mostly in our neighborhood. My mom recognized him as the man who tried to force his way in that night. My dad met Charlie Manson at a motorcycle shop, if I remember right, in Venice Beach in the 60s. Said he remembered a really short, my dad's a foot taller, creepy dude with scary eyes. Didn't think anything of it until he turned up on the news. Not me, but my aunt. She was a judicial assistant in Florida back in the 1980s. One day, 3 well-dressed men came to see the judge. One was particularly good-looking and charming, and really chatted her up. She found out later that she had been chatted up by Ted Bundy. When I was 13, I was living on the streets of Lake Elsinore, California, and had a lady looking after me that was a druggie and a hooker. Nice. She had a John that really liked her and invited us to his place once. He was a real weird-ass bastard. A year later, she turned up dead with a whole bunch of other working girls in the area killed by the I-15 Strangler. When they caught the guy, I instantly recognized him as the John. His name was William Lester Suff, and the trailer that he took us to was his kill shack. I have met 2 while sitting in jail in lockdown protected custody. One was a convicted axe murderer who was waiting on a retrial as the evidence and testimony against him was in question. He was a decent guy as long as you didn't piss him off by changing the channel when football was on or do anything stupid like singing or kicking the doors at night. He even cut my hair for me when we got the clippers. I remember he had Project Innocence lawyers, so he might not actually be one, who knows. His name was Sherwood Brown. The second one was just crazy. He threw all his discovery papers out of the beanpole of his cell, and they included pictures of his victims. He would try to sell dry deodorant from the state issue as drugs, and was supposedly willing to tell people where he buried the bodies to snitch on him, but it sounded like a con, and I avoided talking to him on the rec. From what I remember, he was sitting in jail for a murder in Mississippi, and was just waiting on a transfer. I don't remember his name, as I avoided talking to him. Elizabeth Wetlauer was my dad's nurse. She disappeared. Saw her on the news about 3 months later, led away in handcuffs for killing several seniors over a period of years. Reaction? Holy shit. Then, checking dates of when she was still working, and my dad's date of death about a month later, exchanges with her never raised any red flags, just typical visitor nurse talk. Not a serial killer, but I dated a killer. He was not a killer at the time. We were young and met on a dating website. He went to my high school but graduated a few years before me. The first month was okay. Then he changed. We had a huge fight one time because he said something silly. I don't even remember what it was, but I playfully threw a pillow at him. He immediately flipped out, punched a hole in my door, and told me he'd make it so I would never have anything to come back to. Another time, he finally got a job. Didn't have one when I met him, and I was paying for everything. After job searching for months, he got one. It's his first few days at the new job, and all of a sudden, he doesn't want to go in. No reason, he just doesn't feel like it. I tell him he better get to that damn job or he's going to lose it. After a lot of arguing, he gets ready, and we both get in the car so I can drive him to work. As I'm driving, it gets more heated, and he starts strangling me while I'm at a red light. The red light was right next to a gas station, and I pull in there while his hands are around my throat. I manage to get him off me, and I get out of the car and scream, "What the F?" "I'm sorry. I blacked out. You just pissed me off so much. I told you, I didn't want to go to work." The relationship lasted less than a year. That long. He cheated on me with some girl, and for the first and only time in my life, I was glad someone was cheating on me. You can go live with her and be someone else's problem now. Then years later, when I saw him on the news, I felt really bad for that thought. He had handcuffed his then girlfriend, who had just had his baby, to the bed and strangled her to death. He thought she had cheated on him. He then dismembered her body and lived with it for a month in their apartment. Eventually, the smell tipped some people off, along with his girlfriend not being seen by family in a bit. The baby was okay though, and was taken in by the girl's family. He went on the run, but was later caught and is currently in prison. If this poster was my friend, I would just shake my head, be grateful that she's alive, and just say, how many signs do you need that this guy was not good? Not me, but my best buddy's older brother lived off the grid in northern Yukon in the 70s. Comes home to Edmonton once every couple of years. Due to terrible gravel and dirt roads back then, it's a 4-day drive. Starting his journey one time, he picks up a hitchhiker. It's the code of the North. People help each other. They hit it off, and the hitcher even helps out with the driving duties. One time, when the hitcher was sleeping, my buddy's brother hears on the radio a police alert about multiple murderer in the area. He matches the description of the hitcher. As they are still in the middle of nowhere, he turns off the radio, and he ends up staying with the guy for 2 more days. When they finally got into a populated area, they stopped at a diner, and he called the cops. Provincial cops did a traffic stop 30 minutes later and got the guy. He had killed his wife, kid, and her parents. I was a peace officer paramedic at San Quentin on Condemned Row. We had 415 on my last day there. I knew them all. The serial killers were extremely interesting. I had to walk the tiers, deliver medications, escort the inmates to and from medical and dental appointments, and of course, respond to all assaults, medical emergencies, shootings, and stabbings. So many shootings and stabbings. Guns? I lived in a mirrored house, one my family, the other my aunt, for my first 10 years of life in Mexico. My aunt met a guy from the USA, which somehow stayed for a year or 2 at her house. He was okay, and my aunt fell in love with him. Never really said that, but we saw it. My father was always kind of suspicious of that guy, but never had problems with him. After he left, he went to China, and my aunt went there once to visit him. After that, we didn't really hear about him. Me and my parents and brother left Mexico when I was 10 and came to Croatia. So after 7 years, we find out that he became an English teacher in China, and one of his students casually looked on the FBI webpage for wanted people and saw her teacher. Apparently, this guy, back when he was leaving in the USA, had a girlfriend who had a daughter about 10 years old. He then started to help her with the daughter and sometimes drive her to school. He tried to sexually abuse her. Eventually, the mother found out and wanted to report him, but he then killed her and her daughter, ran away, and was a very wanted man. The student was shocked, but immediately reported him. He was then arrested, and it was over the news. The thought that the guy lived meters away from me for 2 years and could have done something to me or my family at any point haunts me. I don't really remember that guy, but my parents reminded me about him and told me the story. I was an appellate public defender in Kansas City, and we shared offices with the death penalty unit. So my interactions with a few famous killers is in talking to their attorneys and paralegals and listening to their demands. As a death penalty client, you have a huge team working your case. The goal is avoiding a death penalty, not necessarily avoiding conviction. They are accustomed to getting what they want in real life, so it is a major wake-up call once incarcerated, and many of these people are older. They hate the beds, they can't have their dentures, they don't get their preferred whatever. These are not people who are just, well, to prison. I had a regular customer at my shop who would come in and buy cigarettes and beer after a shift. He was friendly and polite enough, helped us to catch a shoplifter on one occasion, however, did like to stare a little too much at one of my colleagues. Then a young woman goes missing in my town. It was all over the news as it was completely out of character for her. There were ribbons scattered in trees and lampposts all over. One day, they pulled a body out of the river, and it was identified as this young woman. Her family was devastated. A few days later, they announced the name of the man they wanted to speak to, who had been spotted in a local shop buying cigarettes and beer, and later on CCTV trying to talk to her in a park. However, he hung himself and was found dead in a local park a few days later. It was the customer. The shop footage they showed was from my shop. The cashier had been blurred, so we have no way of knowing who served him that time, but it gives me the creeps just thinking about it. Back in the 40s, my grandparents were on vacation down in Florida. One day, they were at a cafe, and a man approached them, recognizing their Chicago accents, and asked if he could eat with them, being a Chicago native himself. They had a great time chatting and ended up talking for an hour or 2. When they were departing, they realized proper introductions had never been done, and promptly introduced themselves. The response? Al Capone. It's been great talking with you too. Not exactly a serial killer, but certainly responsible for many deaths and too good of a story to pass up. I grew up next to a family whose eldest daughter dated the brother of Luke Ferguson, terrible link, sorry, who wasn't a serial killer but was a murderer and a psychopath. He has since killed an inmate since being in jail for his original murder. There was a big empty lot on our street where everyone in the neighborhood would play baseball, and we always hated it when Luke would come. Guy was such a dick, always whining and trying to bully everyone else. My buddy Patrick took 2 beaners from him one day when he was pitching, and after the second one, charged him with the baseball bat. Luke stopped coming around after that. Some years later, we see him on the news sitting on a damn John Deere tractor being interviewed about his neighbor's murder, say, "Oh, it's a horrible tragedy," only to find out 2 days later he was the one who did it. None of us were shocked. Patrick texted me that night and said I should have ran his fat ass down and launched his skull across the street. Not a serial killer, but still a pretty well-known murder. My ex-boyfriend's older sister was very close with another girl when they were 14 to 16. They spent a ton of time together, and she was always over at their house. Well, that girl ended up murdering her 9-year-old neighbor and burying her in a shallow grave in the woods. She wrote in her diary that she did it because she wanted to know what it was like to kill someone. Whoa. She was caught soon after and is still in prison. Good. Everyone was shocked when it all came out. It messed up both my ex and his older sister pretty bad, and my ex thinks that she at least considered killing him because he was a similar age to the victim and she had plenty of access to him. Not me, but my aunt was one of the only ones who wasn't killed when Ted Bundy went to the sorority in Florida because that night her friend asked her to sleep over. She still has never talked about it, and I only found out she was in the sorority from a project I did in psychology and asked my mom about it since I grew up in Tallahassee where it happened. Very wild, and still gives me goosebumps, so I can't even imagine how my aunt feels, especially these past couple of years when all these shows and movies came out about him. An old employee of mine dated the Phoenix Canal Killer for a couple of years and didn't find out about him till she saw his face on the news. They were no longer together at this point. She came into work the next morning and told me they had arrested him on suspicion of being the killer. The FBI interviewed her and everything. He was eventually found guilty of I think at least 3 murders. She was pretty freaked out about it, you think? This person only killed one person, but he was very quiet at work. We, being a gregarious group, were always trying to get him to talk. One weekend, he went home and killed our CEO's at the time daughter, practically beheading her, and left her infant son in the bed with her body. Saw it on the news afterwards, and jaw on the floor is a complete understatement. Not really the question, but still related. My mother is a doctor. One time, she used to make some rotations on a psychiatric hospital. Basically, almost everyone was acting as many would expect people would act in a psychiatric hospital, except for this one dude who was just chilling on a table while drinking some coffee. My mother obviously noted he was fairly different from the others. At first, everything seemed fine. He was well-read, well-mannered, and came from a particularly well-off family. She didn't see anything wrong with the man until she asked, "So, what are your hobbies?" To which the man responded, "Well, you see, doctor, I really enjoy murdering people. Some people like jogging, some people like to dance, and I just really like murdering people." At first, she thought he was joking, so she pretty much played along and continued interviewing him as normal. Then she found out he wasn't kidding, and that he had murdered at least 11 people. Afterwards, she was always terrorized of the man, but she had a job to do, so she just continued her training as normal. After reading this one, I thought to myself, wow, this sounds like the origin story for a really good villain in a movie. Was a psychiatric nurse, now disabled, retired for a few years, graduated in 1990. Spent my career working in a forensic hospital on different wards for different lengths of time through the years. Worked maximum security remand, assessment, male patients, and a maximum security treatment ward, males, maximum security remand assessment ward, combined with treatment patients on a female ward, also medium security ward of male treatment patients over the years. Patients varied on what crimes they had initially been charged with, so obviously someone was occasionally in for murder of one or more people. More so on the male patient wards, but on the female, some had killed their kids. You have to treat them the same as other patients, no matter the crime. It became just another day at work. I was in Baton Rouge during the early 2000s when Derek Todd Lee was active in the city. I've shared the story before here, so I'll copy and paste my other post. At the time, I was dating a girl who roughly fit the physical profile of the victims. She was house-sitting for her aunt and uncle who lived in a mansion on the LSU lakes, and one evening calls me while driving back to their house from errands, and she's crying. "There's someone following me, a white pickup truck." At this point, the suspect was believed to be driving exactly this. I started driving around in circles, and it's still following me. I grabbed my roommate, and we were out the door. He drove and made the 20-minute drive to her aunt's house in 8 minutes. When we were approaching the interstate exit, I called and told her to head to the house. She was freaking out. He was still behind her, but she got to the house and ran inside. A minute later, we pull up as 2 houses down on the opposite side of the street, a white pickup parks. I run in and check on her, and she confirms it is the truck that's been following her. Ask my roommate to get my back and head out there. Go give a rap to the hood of the truck and trying my best to look or sound intimidating. I just stare the driver down and say, "You gotta get out of here, buddy. I don't know what you want, but you gotta get out of here." The driver nervously eyes me and drives off. I'm thinking another stupid LSU student, a misunderstanding. She lost track of the car following her, and this is just some guy parking here just a few houses down from the famed submarine races parking spot on the lakes. I didn't see the guy again in person, but I recognized him when I saw him nearly a year later when the cops perp walked Derek Todd Lee, arresting him as the Baton Rouge serial killer. I saw the man I made eye contact with that night and realized what I stopped and how I didn't take seriously someone who was capable of murder many times over. Not a serial killer, but a close call. I was hitching as a teen, and middle-aged guy picked me up. He started asking creepy questions and turning to stare at me instead of watching the road, so I asked him to pull over when we passed a busy pub, thinking I'd be safe in a crowd. He kept going and veered off the road into bushland behind a park that had a dirt road. As soon as the car stopped, I tried to open the door and he grabbed my leg. I kicked out and caught him in the face, opened the door and ran back to the main road and just kept running, but he didn't follow me. When I got home, I told my friend, who was dating a cop, and described him with the distinctive neck and hand tats. He knew who it was thanks to drug charges. Apparently, he was well known to them. It depends on your definition. The psycho-stalker type, never, gang members, yeah. I went to school with several. Most are in prison for the rest of their lives. One of them showed up as a new recruit at my job. He had gone to prison for 10 years for shooting into a crowd at the annual Cinco de Mayo festival. It was all over the news. I knew it was him before the cops did. Another one shot down the street at someone, hit an innocent bystander in the head. Again, everyone knew before the cops. It wasn't their first time. I have no idea how many other times they had done it. There were several unsolved mysteries in the area, but no one really cares about gang members dying beyond their people. You can't help who you go to school with. My grandma went on a date with Ted Bundy and was supposed to go home with him, but she wanted him to meet her parents first. Luckily, when she said that, he met them, and she was never killed. When I found out that she went on a date with Ted Bundy, it was right after I watched a documentary on him, and I was like, oh my god, I didn't even know what to say. How many of our listeners or readers met Ted Bundy? Feels like a lot. Back in the late 90s, my grandma ran into a woman she knew in our small town. The woman asked how my grandma was. My grandma, "Oh, things are wonderful. I have 3 beautiful grandbabies and the family business is doing great." The woman starts crying. Her son is facing the death penalty because he joined a cult, and he and the leader went and killed members who left. He gets out when he's 69, and the parents have a house for him around the corner from my dad's. My mom grew up around Pasadena. Night Stalker was still at large, and a body was found in the park behind my grandparents' house, so it was close to home for her. Her best friend had started seeing a new guy, but ended it pretty quickly because the guy's hygiene was awful. She said he always smelled really bad and his breath was gag-inducing. When Richard Ramirez was caught, my mom got a call from her best friend who was in complete hysterics. She dumped the Night Stalker because he was stinky.